excited to go on this super awesome Thanksgiving Austin, Texas road trip.
Me too, but I really want to check the internet first before we go.
Yeah.
I sure hope nothing I see on here ruins this trip for me.
Live action remakes. Love to hate them, hate to love them. Regardless of your feelings, we can all agree they're not going anywhere. As artists, we, the two of us, personally feel dissatisfied with the array of soulless spectacle that have been laid out before us by big studios. More often than not, they feel like the half-digested worm regurgitated up to the unassuming baby bird. And yet, we have never taken the time to identify what about these live-action remakes feels so wrong. So, we took a deep dive into the world we have hardly dared to venture in before, uncovering ideas along the way of humanity, homage, and spectacle. So, why don't you come along for the ride?
I don't know if we want to keep that in. That's kind of weird. As I really do not need to explain to an art history professor, but will anyway, realism's place in the philosophy of art has shifted over time. The idea that art should be representational, or figurative, the technical words for realistic, has been prevalent in the arts for so long that it may subconsciously persist to this day. Methods for creating perspective existed across the globe prior to the Renaissance, but once the use of linear perspective was standardized in Europe, representation was the utmost standard for Western art. During this time, skilled artists were commissioned to paint portraits of real people or depictions of real scenes, emphasizing reality. Narrative paintings telling historical events were recognized as more immersive with a proper use of perspective. If the eye could be fooled into believing that what was depicted in a painting or in a sculpture could truly exist in space, the artist had successfully done their job. Advanced use of perspective, especially in architectural paintings, drew higher prices due to its necessary technical skill. Plato, despite his negative opinion on art as imitation, notably commented on art in its relation to nature. Our Renaissance buddy, Leonardo, emphasized the importance of the form within painting, of chiaroscuro. That's not how you say it. Of fooling the eye that something flat is really three-dimensional. Furthermore, he glorified painting's role as that of an imitator of nature, nature being the ultimate standard of beauty. Kant, too, discussed how our perception of beauty in forms should derive from nature. Nature, nature, nature.
The actual realism movement, which hallmarked the beginning of modern art, came as a reaction to individuals feeling that the arts were less grounded in reality than they should be. Even though art was realistic in form, it lacked realism in subject matter. And so a shift began toward the depiction of average people in real-life situations. This principle aligned with Walter Benjamin's, that's not how you say it, later comments of the masses desiring for art to come closer, spatially and humanly. I'm like, why did I write it like this? Moreover, as photography was introduced, the arts became more accessible to any layman, and subject matter for what was constituted as art was now called into question. As Benjamin continues, art is now interchangeable with reality, when before, the arts reflected reality in a sort of one-way mirror. The onset of modern art in the late 1800s gave name to the actual terms of representational versus non-representational art, as now there was something else in play. Artists, having been freed by photography, were freed to explore other strategies of art making in ways that were adamantly resisted. Viewers were scandalized and offended. After a few years, art philosophers overcorrected and were calling non-representational art the highest standard of beauty. The average audience, however, needed more training, more understanding, to properly acknowledge non-representational art. No longer could the masses easily identify what it was about art that made it so good. And still, for a long time, art philosophers could only write about non-representational art in relation to the representational. Realistic representation was still in the back of everyone's mind, and any art going forward had to be in response to the representational art that preceded it. Nowadays, when it comes to art training, realism is often the starting point from which to branch out from, because it provides a solid foundation of knowledge, rules an artist can then choose to break. It is this mindset that seems to be harmfully perpetuated in popular media. Though we have been branching out from realistic representational art for well over 100 years now, the baseline, the standard, still seems to be that which can accurately reflect real life the best. We have the most developed knowledge of that standard. That which is real may very well be that which feels most easily immersible to us, and what we most easily recognize, which is ourselves, depicted as literally and tangibly as possible.
So, what's the point of bringing all this up? There is something to be said for the mantra of the OG realism movement, that realism is most effective when it is, to some extent, grounded in the true human experience of reality. The realists believe that true realism runs deeper than surface-level likeness, and that when you make the choice to show humanity as it really is, rather than just what it looks like, the viewer will do more than admire your skills as a copyist. They will feel a human connection to your work. Branching off of that, I would argue that any art that copies something else must have a life outside of the original. Sheet music tells the musician what to do, the dancer performs preset choreography, the actor recites texts, but all of these art forms need the artist's humanity to survive.
Hi, are you filming right now?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Oh, sorry. My dad's making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I was wondering if you guys wanted any.
Branching off of that, I would argue that any art that copies something else must have a life outside of the original. Sheet music tells the musician what to do, the dancer performs preset choreography, the actor recites texts. But all of these art forms require the artist's humanity to survive. An artist's individual voice is what activates a piece of work, what brings it from the realm of correct into beautiful. Simply going through the motions and presenting something that looks or sounds accurate is not enough when making art that is worthy of admiration. There must be an inner desire, a craving, a connection. The artist must love the work enough to give themselves to it. This is similar to the idea of true versus superficial faith in the Bible. In Matthew 15:7-9, Jesus accuses the Pharisees of hypocrisy, saying, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men."
This concept of the necessary connection between creating and humanity aligns with Dewey's concept of art as experience. He reminds us that for much of history, artistic creation and normal living coincided. People created out of practical need, yes, but with the natural heart and desire to heighten the practicality into a beautiful thing. Artistic creation is an inherent aspect of human experience. When art is grounded in this fact, it is easier to draw a connection with other humans. When art is grounded in a watered-down version of reality, when it is more about how the reality is reflected than the reality itself, it becomes less connected.
A step further than art copying reality is art copying art. There are a multitude of reasons why art is copied, but the simplest is that it is easier to do something that has been done before. It is easier to watch another actor's performance and mimic it, to play a piece of music like it's been played 1,000,000 times before, or to dance the piece just like Bethany did before you. But does easier mean better? In this context, I don't think so. Trying to make art the way someone else does stifles the way you make art, which is a tragedy, plain and simple.
But wait,
You might say.
if originality is always the answer, why do we continue to return to the same stories over and over again? I love things that are unique and fresh, but I also order the same thing at Chipotle every single time because I am a creature of habit and I can't escape the well-worn ruts of my comfort zone. How do you justify that?
Great question. I think live-action movies, in particular, really speak to this human dichotomy. We crave originality, but also familiarity. Dare I say nostalgia, but we'll touch on that later. But there is a difference between content and the method with which it is produced. The issue here is not what we are recreating, but why and how we are recreating it. Why am I revamping this specific piece of art? Do I feel there is more to say, or am I just beating a dead horse for my own monetary gain? How am I revamping it? Does the medium I have chosen serve the story I am telling, or am I just shoving a square peg, animation, into a round hole, live action, and calling it a day? This is the part where I apply my previous yammerings to the topic at hand. Live-action remakes. There is an inherent contradiction between animation and live-action that makes transferring over from one to the other quite the ordeal. Animation is, by nature, based in the subversion of reality, and live-action is, by nature, grounded in reality. CGI can do a lot, but it cannot shake the realness of real human beings being human. We are part of the Cinderella 2015 fan club because its creators understood this. They understood the medium of live action. They understood that because their medium was closer to reality than that of the original, it must therefore be more grounded in reality than the original. Relationships and characters had to be more fleshed out.
Cinderella, the prince, the king, the stepmother.
Animals couldn't talk,
Thank goodness for that.
and backstories needed to be added.
Cinderella, the prince, the king, the stepmother.
I'm sorry, can I help you?
My bad, I'm just trying to provide some context.
Well, your context is getting in the way of my intellectual thought process.
Oh, speaking of intellectual thought process, you're gonna have to put yours on hold for a second so that we can hear from two very special guests.
What?
Socrates and Mato.
I wasn't finished! You do this to me every single time, and I'm so...
Tell me this. Is animation an imitation of real life?
Surely animation is a stylization of real life. But you know better than me.
Ah, so you would say animation is an intentional diversion from realism. How then does animation work effectively as a medium?
It would seem animation comments on reality in a heightened way. Animation does not need to imitate reality directly because it does not need to fit into the box of reality. It is not held to the same standards of realism. But I don't know, I'm just an idiot.
So is it that animation as a medium makes it easier to suspend disbelief?
Yeah, you're so smart. I should have thought of that.
So would a live-action remake be an acceptable substitute for animation?
No, because it is harder to suspend disbelief in a medium whose standard is real life.
So, should a live-action adaptation draw from the animated original or the animated original's source material?
The source material.
So, when a live-action adaptation imitates an animated original based on other source material based on real life,
Live-action remakes are an imitation of an imitation of an imitation. They are infinitely detached from any semblance of an original form. But what do I know?
so that would make live-action remakes
Total garbage, in our opinion.
To expand on Dewey's art as experience, good stories are often considered universal because they successfully draw out recognizable features of humanity. As a result, they are continuously passed down and filtered through individual experiences. This is all good and natural. Humanity creates naturally, we respond by creating, but as an additional result, the reputation of a work of art gets perpetuated across time. If we look at stories like this through the lens of the institutional theory of art, it would seem that at the first iteration of the work, whether it be an animated original or its source material, the story was proposed as a candidate for appreciation. Each consequent retelling builds off of the clout of that original. It does not campaign for its own place in the art world, but profits off what came before. It benefits from its reputation. When we warp the plot or medium of a piece of art to be more marketable, when we focus on the reputation, we run the risk of losing the humanity, the identity of the original. Often what gets overlooked in these cases is the desire to connect. Let's look at the difference between using a story for its reputation and using a story out of respect or reverence. You should explore a story with a desire to expand on what has already been given to you. In some ways, as a creator, your relationship with a pre-made work should be like your relationship with another person. You want to get to know the story, to pursue the story, to see what you can learn from the story, and see what you can bring to the story. You don't just want to see what the story can do for you. You should have respect for the thing, love for the thing, not greed or lust. Lust is about desire, not love. You see the story as having something to give to you. You're not giving anything to the story, you're just taking away. And it is so easy to poach a good story, to lust after a good story, because of nostalgia. These universal stories, these human stories, are comfortable and recognizable. We grew up with them. We associate them with different aspects of our lives. We have woven them into our very identity. We may associate them with a sense of belonging. Nostalgia numbs the bad memories and puts a spotlight on the good. Nostalgia is always present, lingering just under our surface emotion. Nostalgia can be an escape. We especially take to animated films as a trip down memory lane, as a source of comfort and familiarity. Nostalgia is both a result of good stories and a driving force that can create stories. Unfortunately, anyone can capitalize on the already existent nostalgia factor of animated films, because you don't have to do any of the work to evoke the feeling. The original has already done the work. Live-action remakes lust after the pre-existing nostalgia of animated classics. The nostalgia that comes along with live-action remakes, therefore, is stolen, born not out of good storytelling, but of laziness. They are beating a dead horse. No, not beating a dead horse, beating a live horse until it dies. They defile the original. They cannot justify their existence without the nostalgia.
C.S. Lewis, in his essay An Experiment on Criticism, explores the idea of the few versus the many. The few are not primarily concerned with entertainment. They prefer to see the artwork in the fullness of its creation, for all that it has to offer in an intellectual, emotional, and even spiritual sense. The artwork may be transformative to the individual. It may expand their perspective. The many, on the other hand, look at artworks through how it may align with their own preconceived understanding, how it may adjust itself to meet their criteria, and not how the many may expand themselves to meet the criteria of the artwork. In our particular case, we may consider the few to be those who take issue with the concept of live-action remakes, and the many to be those who desire and appreciate them. This is not to inherently place these differing opinions on a value scale, but simply to illustrate that in the case of the many, people may just want something to absorb, to relate to efficiently without diving into why they love it so much. They may want to take another surface-level look at something they already understand. In the case of the few and the many, we all have a desire to be immersed in the thing. There is a fascination with seeing animated stories brought into a real context, a fascination with seeing familiar stories retold, but a desire for these stories to be, at their core, the same. We want a big hug of nostalgia to comfort us with its familiar voice. These many want to close the distance, as Benjamin would say. In history, 2D animation becomes 3D, becomes live-action CGI. Realism increases immediacy, increases immersion.
We have already discussed how live-action film capitalizes on nostalgia, and how without nostalgia, they are empty storytelling vessels. But it would seem that the immersion of live-action remakes falls flat as well. Because animation understands the medium it is working within, its immersion does not need to fight to pull through. In a live-action remake, on the other hand, the immersion is forced, as people need to filter their investment first through the lens of the animated original, before embracing the realistic adaptation before them. As Socrates and Mado previously discussed, live-action waters down the richness of animated originals, but the force of nostalgia and immediacy of realism means we eagerly cling to the closeness we can muster. What happens when someone takes advantage of this desire for immersion?
Disney has the corner on the market when it comes to live-action remakes. Beginning in the 90s, the mega studio dabbled in live versions of classic stories. However, for the sake of this analysis, we're going to survey what we would like to declare the contemporary era of live-action remakes, beginning with the 2010 rendition of Alice in Wonderland, and concluding with the 2023 The Little Mermaid. We're also going to look at some honorable mentions of live-action remakes outside of the Disney chokehold. We are using the unreliable Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb for ratings, not as an authority on a value scale, but as a general estimate of opinions.
Number 1. Alice in Wonderland. The 2010 take on the classic novel and animated feature film was considered remarkably average by critics and viewers alike, but it took in a whopping $1.025 billion at the box office. It was popular. Of all the films we will be looking at, Alice ranked in the most user reviews by like several 100,000. It also boasted an all-star cast from renowned director and total freak Tim Burton. For reference, the last Disney movie released before Alice in Wonderland was The Princess and the Frog, Disney's last 2D animated feature film, which made only about $405 million. While 2D animation was already on the downgrade with the rise of 3D animation and, soon to come, live-action remakes, this massive income difference between Alice and The Princess and the Frog may have been the final nail in the coffin. One might say, the death of the animator. What could Disney learn from this result? The masses like live-action versions of stories. They like big movie stars, and they like the grandeur of a large-scale production.
Also in 2010 came The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which we hadn't heard of either. Don't worry, you're not the only one. Apparently this was a remake of Fantasia, and it totally bombed at the box office, making only $213 million with a $150 million budget. However, its reviews were pretty on par with Alice in Wonderland. It just cannot boast the same appeal as Alice in Wonderland. Maybe because most of us haven't watched Fantasia since we were like 4 years old.
Which is a shame.
Or because it was released in the wake of the star-studded Alice in Wonderland. Though, why anyone would want to skip a Nicolas Cage movie beats me.
Disney was not down on its luck for long, however, as the next live-action film to be released was Maleficent, which was the first time Disney took a whack at the villain's perspective, warping a beloved story, much to the appreciation of the masses. Released in 2014, Maleficent, starring the beloved Angelina Jolie and Elle Fanning, made a whopping $758 million at the box office. Maleficent is significant because it marks the first time critics and audiences generally disagreed on the quality of spectacle they were witnessing. Audiences enjoyed the original take on the Sleeping Beauty story, which added more depth depth to some historically flat characters, while critics explains that besides dazzling effort, the film fails to live up to its ambitious intent.
In 2015, along came the live-action rendition of Cinderella, starring Lily James, Cate Blanchett, and Disney live-action veteran Helena Bonham Carter. We're gonna talk more about Cinderella later, so for now, we'll just say it's surprisingly good. Critics and audiences liked this one. The two of us, in our professional opinions, agree. Cinderella expanded on its original animated film in ways that were respectful of the original and adjusted some of its whimsy in order to properly fit the medium in which it was placed. This change did not come with the consequence of losing the magic. On the contrary, this film, grossing over $542 million, enchanted the masses and pacified skeptics.
People went absolutely feral over the 2016 live-action Jungle Book. It had a box office intake of just under $1 billion. Critics and audiences were practically drooling over this movie. Why? For one, like its live-action predecessors, Jungle Book has a killer cast, drawing in superfans of all ages. But interestingly, many reviews point out how immersive the viewing experience is, despite the fantastical content. The production was expansive. Many went so far as to comment it as a spectacle. That's interesting. Mae, when you think of the 1967 Jungle Book, do you think of spectacle?
No, I think of a heartwarming tale of a young boy being raised by a bear and a leopard.
You're so right! Why is it necessary to turn a simple story into a spectacle? Was the original lacking in some way? If not, why was the live-action remake being praised for it having improved on the original?
Now this is interesting. Disney got a little excited at the absolute bank Alice in Wonderland made, and so, in 2016, they released the first live-action sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass. And it sucked. Everybody thought so. In this instance, people said that the lackluster story failed to live up to the original characters, despite being visually stunning and flashy as ever. It's almost as if prostituting your character's nostalgia for profit might backfire. This only made $300 million, which is, all things considered, not very much.
Every time you think Disney might just learn a lesson, however, they land right back up on their feet. Or perhaps a better analogy would be landing on their diamond-encrusted slippers. Bam! 2017's Beauty and the Beast, starring world-renowned actress and lackluster singer Emma Watson, and just so many other people. $1.266 billion at the box office. Critics and audiences liked it well enough. Common factors include, yet again, a star-studded cast, total enchantment, and an eye for nostalgia. Beauty and the Beast might be one of the best examples of how reputation was prioritized over originality, as the content of the original film did not warrant itself to live action. The suspension of disbelief is much easier in animation, and yet the changes made to the script did not add any more appeal to humanoid furniture, only added unnecessary fluff to an already fluffy story that was perfectly content in its fluff before being desecrated. And for all the heightened spectacle, they still managed to give Belle the biggest downgrade of a yellow dress imaginable. But I digress.
Christopher Robin, 2018, took notes from Cinderella and managed to finagle a charming original story by combining nostalgia with originality. It received generally positive reviews, but only made $200 million, perhaps the result of its smaller budget and smaller scale of production. Nothing spectacle about this simple tale. Maybe cute and sweet just doesn't cut it anymore, just like it once did in animation. Or maybe cute and sweet doesn't have a place in live action. Nah, hopefully Disney executives won't internalize that idea.
Uh-oh! Here comes Dumbo 2019! Apparently, Tim Burton didn't have enough spotlight in the early 2010s because he's back and creepier than ever. Dumbo, once cute and sweet, becomes unsettlingly realistic. No one asked for this, and that seems to be the conclusion of critics and audiences alike. It still made $350 million, though, more than Christopher Robin did, despite receiving much better feedback. So at this point, why would Disney care what people think of their movies? It's big, it's spectacular, it's live. What more is needed to rake in the dough? As it seems, literally nothing. And thus, Disney descends only further into madness.
After a brief lull, live-action remakes begin to gain traction again, with no sign of slowing down. We have reached a turning point, wherein audiences begin to love live-action remakes, while critics bash on them. Might it be that the spectacle increases, while the production quality decreases? Here we have Aladdin, 2019. Audiences praise for its kick-butt cast, dazzling visuals, impressive scale, all the while ever full of spectacle that rivals the nostalgia of the original. Critics are like, hang on a minute, can we even beat the original? To which we say, why is it about beating the original? Can't we all just get along? Regardless, the film made over $1 billion.
Also in 2019, we have a film I have been eagerly waiting to discuss. The Lion King live-action remake. Nothing infuriates me more than this movie, which I admittedly have not seen and refuse to on principle. In this individual instance, Rotten Tomatoes summaries can describe the dilemma of The Lion King much better than I can.
While it can take pride in its visual achievements, The Lion King is a by-the-numbers retelling that lacks the energy and heart that made the original so beloved, though for some fans, that may just be enough. A Disney live-action remake that successfully updates the original, The Lion King adds gorgeous new visual effects to a story the audience knows by heart.
But that's so stupid. That's like if I went to Buc-ee's and I was like, Tessa, look, it's Buc-ee's! I'm so excited! What? Let's go. What? Why? That's a terrible logo. Oh, it's beautiful. It doesn't look like a real beaver at all. Why does that matter? Well, actually...
Do you see what I see? The subject matter of this movie does not warrant itself to realism. It's lions that are supposed to have feelings. Critics are starting to wake up and realize that maybe visual splendor is not enough to justify a soulless recreation. Audiences, however, gobble up the nostalgia and are endlessly attracted to remarkable visual effects and remarkable casts. I need you to understand the degree to which this chokehold exists. The Lion King made $1.657 billion. That is this many numbers written out. That is the most of any of these remakes. That is outrageous. Are we in the wrong?
Nah.
I don't even want to be talking about this anymore. Remember Maleficent? That nice original live-action rendition of Sleeping Beauty? It made too much money, so they made a sequel. Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. And it sucked. Everyone agrees, critics say it's trash and that it cannot justify its existence with lackluster storytelling, and audiences... Wait. What? Audiences gave this a 95% rating? Why did they...
Impressive cast, remarkable visuals, impressive scale of production.
Why do we even bother? This made $500 million.
Lady and the Tramp is a thing that exists. It was launched alongside Disney+. People thought it was meh. Actually, critics like this one better than audiences. Apparently, it's practically a one-to-one transition to the original film. Apparently, it's cute, and it's sweet. As aforementioned, that doesn't seem to be enough for audiences, because where's the grandeur? When things are not scaled up to match the impressive capabilities of live-action film, people aren't interested. Literally, people aren't interested. Nobody saw this. It only has 500 audience reviews, as opposed to Alice in Wonderland's 250,000.
Look out, it's 2020, and here comes Mulan. Yeah, remember the live-action Mulan? Audiences don't want to, apparently. Here's the deal with Mulan. It attempted to rectify the sins of the original, but in doing so, it made the remake virtually unrecognizable to the audience that was so excited to see their favorite nostalgic film come to spectacular life. It changed things, but not in a way that paid homage to the original. Let's face it, the masses weren't seeking cultural awareness, they were seeking the culturally insensitive Mushu. What can we glean from this remake? Spectacle is incomplete without nostalgia. The masses need both.
Disney saw the money Maleficent brought in and concluded that audiences like stories being told from the villain's perspective. And, by Jove, it seems they were right. Cruella 2021, starring Tessa's beloved Emma Stone, has alarmingly positive reviews. And yet, the reviews are the same old, words like dazzling, visually captivating.
I'm keeping that in.
Here, we don't see any complaints about not doing the original story justice. Cruella seems to not defile its source material, but how much nostalgia did audiences really have for the original Cruella anyway? Could Cruella really be counted as a remake, or is it simply a rendition, like Cinderella or Christopher Robin?
On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have Pinocchio 2022. One thing that we can guarantee as a human race is that we can bond over our mutual hatred of a thing, and by Jove, everyone hates Pinocchio 2022. I was trying to avoid using Letterboxd, the people's movie review app, but in this particular case, I just couldn't resist. On a serious note, though, Pinocchio proves that somewhere, deep inside the masses, there really is a line that live-action remakes should not cross, as they descend endlessly into the abyss of soulless storytelling and visual spectacle. But it seems the masses are eager to throw their dissatisfaction to the side, because they were eager to get their hands on
The Little Mermaid 2023. The Little Mermaid 2023. Here we are at the end of our exploration.
Wow, already?
Another remarkable cast takes the lead in another grandiose production with more stunning visuals, another killer soundtrack, another magical, nostalgic dive into a familiar world. There's nothing wrong with The Little Mermaid, it's just not particularly right. It is further proof that live-action remakes are not going anywhere anytime soon, as it made $570 million. I think this Letterboxd review summarizes it pretty well.
And by Jove, live-action remakes are not going anywhere anytime soon, no matter how well we pick them apart. Quote, "The money is precisely why all of these critiques are pointless, especially this one. They aren't made from an authentic desire to create good, meaningful art. Disney doesn't care if the movie is good. They care if people go see it so they can make $1 billion. And because we're all silly, nostalgic people, we do just that." That's a quote from the Trove's video, Why Cinderella is Disney's Only Good Live-Action Remake. Take a look at the upcoming lineup. I cannot wait to see how bad Mufasa bombs, but of course, they made a sequel, as the spectacle of the original remake made $1 gazillion. And the threshold for elapsed time between original and remake is decreasing. Moana 2 has just been released, and the live-action version of the first film is set to come out this upcoming summer.
Let's take a moment to explore the reason we decided to discuss this topic in the first place, the DreamWorks How to Train Your Dragon live-action remake. As an avid enjoyer of the How to Train Your Dragon movies, I noticed immediately upon watching the recent trailer that dropped, it is almost a frame-by-frame copy of scenes from the original movie. There's absolutely no adjustment to fit the new medium wherein the story is being told. Already, the film is being called out for its soulless attention to detail, specifically with Toothless's facial expressions, which, in the original story, communicated so clearly, but in the live-action are stunted in favor of realism, similarly to the lack of emotive range within the live-action Lion King. This could all be written off as an occupational hazard of live-action remakes, except for one interesting detail. The Universal Studios Isle of Berk attraction is set to open on May 22nd, and the live-action version of How to Train Your Dragon will be released a mere 3 weeks later, on June 13th. Disney has capitalized on the human desire for immersion since their own parks opened. This is not a new phenomenon. But in this particular case, DreamWorks is not even trying to be subtle. It's not even hyperbole to suggest that this particular live-action remake is a soulless advertising ploy to promote the new theme park, and the theme park will in turn promote the live-action film. This is a blatant example of reputation being prioritized over originality. The How to Train Your Dragon remake is not operating in consideration of its audience. It is operating entirely in the interest of the studio. The thing is, they're not even faking it anymore. Misunderstanding audiences' desires is not only the fault of the How to Train Your Dragon remake. The recent Avatar: The Last Airbender live-action TV series missed the mark too. Those executives reacted so strongly against the sins of the remake that shall not be named, that they prioritized technical and plot accuracy and ignored the heart of why the story was so beloved. If the characters had the same depth as their animated forebearers, the creators of the remake may have been able to take more creative liberties with the plot, because the narrative would still honor the source material. Instead, the heartless characters do nothing to drive forward a plot we have already experienced in a more holistic way. The masses want immersion, something they seem to believe that live action has to offer them. But as we have seen, immersion is incomplete without the all-too-familiar nostalgia, and depending on nostalgia can only be justified through proper homage to the original.
What can we conclude from our exploration of Disney's live-action remakes? In live-action remakes, we see a desire from the masses for the exploitation of nostalgia, a desire for immersion and a newfound focus on spectacle. Nostalgia does not, however, automatically equal quality. Immersibility is not enough to justify the medium a story is told in. Once upon a time, animation was very impressive. It was new. It was exciting. Now, we're very used to it. Now, when you can do something new in live action, it is how big you can be, how bold you can be, how innovative you can be. You're trying to impress rather than tell a story. If you trust critics, we don't, but still we can use them to make an inference. It would seem that in the majority of cases, quality of storytelling deteriorates as spectacle increases. Take a look at this graph. We also included a graph of Letterboxd reviews for each of these films, which align pretty closely with the Rotten Tomatoes user reviews.
The 2015 rendition of Cinderella proves that there is a right way to go about creating a live-action rendition of a story that is famous for its animated original. It strikes a perfect balance between paying homage to and expanding upon its predecessor. There is a clear respect for, even love for, the content of the story. It also knows what it is. The creators tweaked the original story so that it would serve the medium that confined it. The result? The storytelling is not in any way hindered by the realistic aspect. I'm looking at you, Lion King. Animation is unable to withstand a direct transfer into live action because animation subverts reality. while live action is subservient to it. For example, in the original animated film, there is a scene where the king and his advisor are capital B bouncing on the king's capital B bed as the king capital B brandishes his sword, threatening to murder his advisor for letting Cinderella escape. It is a legitimately brilliant and hilarious scene, acted and animated to absolute perfection. But if they had tried to recreate that scene in the live-action adaptation, it wouldn't have worked. For one thing, the king would have been dubbed a murderous lunatic, and for another, it would have just looked really stupid. And why did Cinderella 2015 not attempt it? Because the creators understood that live action equals closer to the human experience of reality. They understood that suspension of disbelief is much more effective in the context of a literal drawing. They also understood that closer to reality means more humanity. Some examples of this are the added plot of the king's declining health and eventual death, which adds more weight to the prince's search for a bride and eventual succession to the throne, the expansion of Cinderella's backstory, how we follow her through the death of her parents and subsequent transition from neglected stepdaughter into abused servant, which, again, adds more emotional weight to her character arc, the meet-cute of Cinderella and the prince before the ball, which helps to justify the intensity of their connection later on. I'm going to stop there, but trust me, I could go on and on. This movie is a brilliantly crafted rendition, but even more than that, it's just a good movie. It stands on its own. And yet, the desire for live-action remakes remains.
There's so much more that could be discussed within this topic. Cost of creating an animated versus live-action film, preconceptions about animated movies being for children, how animation is perceived differently in Eastern cultures, and psychological factors that are at play beyond nostalgia. But nostalgia is a valuable emotion that is easily capitalized on, and studios such as Disney will continue on this cycle as long as there are stories to poach from. So long as this is the attitude taken, what was once a valuable story and work of art will be spoiled. Live-action remakes will never be good works of art if they remain exactly that, live-action remakes. There is no clear-cut solution to this dilemma. There will always be complaints when live-action versions change story elements, and there will always be complaints when things stay the same. However, good art does have a place within the live-action realm. Live-action renditions should come from a respect for the content of the original, and a desire to expand upon or say something new about that content, rather than the desire to take advantage of or exploit the content's reputation. Additionally, remakes should never divert from the original just because. They shouldn't be different for the sake of being different, but because there is value in being original. It all comes down to purpose. Why are we rebooting the story? Are we rebooting it because there is more to say, or because we know people will listen regardless? How do we honor the original while expanding perspectives? Cinderella 2015 was brilliant because it knew its place. It paid homage to the original animated film, and yet it did not try to act as a substitute for it. Its relationship to nostalgia is one of awareness, rather than prostitution. Makes sense though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It like prostitutes
Yeah.
nostalgia.
Yeah. I think we should add in the little laughter after the word prostitution.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Animation is a historically rich medium that holds its own place and value in the film industry. As creators, our obligation is to do justice to the material we are working with, not to scavenge the graveyard of stories that have been laid to rest. We have to pay attention to what is warranted, and resist the human desire to capitalize on humanity. As artists, we can serve other artists and audiences alike by pushing the narratives that matter, and by cherishing the stories that came before.
See, look. Wouldn't this be so much better?
I'm glad you're not a graphic design major.